He thought he held all the cards. At the peak of New York Fashion Week, the most photographed event of the year, Gideon Vance was ready to unveil his new life. On his arm wasn't his quiet, unassuming wife, but his dazzling mistress, a woman he was proudly introducing as his future. He was moments away from a promotion that would cement his legacy. But in a world built on image and power, the most devastating secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. What happens when the woman you cast aside is revealed to be the one who owns your entire world? Get ready for a story of betrayal, public humiliation, and epic revenge that proves you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and simmering resentment. Gideon Vance adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, showing a man carved from ambition. Tonight was the apex of his career, the culmination of a decade spent clawing his way up the corporate ladder at Aurelian Vanguard, the global luxury fashion conglomerate. The annual Vanguard Gala, the centerpiece of New York Fashion Week, was his stage. And tonight, he would finally shed the last vestige of his old, unremarkable life. That life was currently standing by the doorway to their master bedroom, holding a lint roller. Catherine, his wife of 12 years. "You have a little something on your shoulder, dear," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic, as if his perfection was a shared responsibility, and she had somehow failed in her part. Gideon didn't turn. He just glanced at his reflection, a flicker of irritation crossing his handsome face. "I've got it, Catherine." He brushed at the invisible speck on his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The suit was a statement. It screamed power, success, and a future she was not part of. Catherine retreated slightly, the lint roller held in her hand like a useless talisman. She was dressed in a simple, elegant but forgettable navy blue dress. It was the kind of dress women wore when they didn't want to be noticed, when their primary function was to be a supportive shadow. For 12 years, she had played that role to perfection. She had organized his life, hosted his dull but necessary business dinners, remembered the birthdays of his superiors' children, and celebrated his every minor victory as if it were the moon landing. She had been the perfect, quiet, background-dwelling wife, and he was so incredibly tired of it. "Is the car ready?" he asked, his tone clipped. He picked up his phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Crystal, a picture of her in a shimmering, backless silver gown. The caption read, "Ready to be unveiled, my love. XOXO." A slow, predatory smile touched Gideon's lips. "It's been waiting downstairs for 10 minutes, Catherine replied. He could hear the faint tremor in her voice. She wasn't stupid. She knew something had been wrong for months. The late nights he no longer bothered to explain, the scent of a different perfume on his shirts, the cold chasm that had opened between them in their king-sized bed. But she never confronted him. That was the thing about Catherine. She was pathologically conflict-averse. She absorbed his neglect and cruelty with a quiet, maddening stoicism. "Good," he said, pocketing his phone. "I'm heading out." He finally turned to face her. He allowed his gaze to sweep over her, from her sensible low heels to her neatly pinned brown hair. There was nothing wrong with her. She was pleasant-looking, gentle. But she was wallpaper, in a world of vibrant, clashing, statement-making art. She was beige wallpaper. He was a masterpiece, trapped in a beige room. "You look nice," he offered, the compliment as empty as the promises he'd made at their wedding. "You look incredible, Gideon," she said, and her sincerity was like a dull ache in his chest. "I hope you have a wonderful night. I know how important it is. for the head of North American Operations promotion. "It's practically mine," he cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. "Bartholomew Finch is retiring. He practically told me the job was mine last week. Tonight is just the coronation." He wanted that title more than he had ever wanted anything. It was the key to everything: the power, the respect, the life he truly deserved. A life with a woman like Crystal, a woman who shone as brightly as he did. He walked towards the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He felt a fleeting, minuscule pang of something that might have been guilt, but he crushed it. This was necessary. Evolution. A snake shedding its skin. "Don't wait up," he said. The words a final, casual severance. He didn't look back as he stepped out of the apartment, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, sealing her inside their gilded cage. He didn't see her flinch, didn't see the way her shoulders slumped, or the way she brought a trembling hand to her lips. He didn't see the single tear that traced a path down her cheek before she deliberately, methodically, wiped it away. He saw only the future, and it was glittering, silver, and waiting for him in the back of another car downtown. As Gideon's elevator descended, Catherine walked over to the vast window overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan glittered below, a galaxy of ambition and dreams. His dream was to conquer it. He never once stopped to ask what hers was. She picked up her own phone, not the simple one she used for groceries and daily reminders, but a sleek, encrypted device hidden in her study. She scrolled to a single contact, marked only with a single initial, B. She typed a short, simple message. "He's on his way." "Are we ready?" The reply came back in seconds. "The stage is set, Madam Chairwoman. We are ready." Catherine took a deep, steadying breath. The first truly full breath she'd felt she'd taken in years. She looked at her reflection, not in the dark glass of the window, but in the polished screen of the device in her hand. The reflection of the woman in the simple navy dress flickered, and for a moment she saw the Queen underneath. Tonight wasn't Gideon's coronation. It was hers. The grand atrium at the Metropolitan Arts Pavilion was a cathedral of modern excess. Soaring white marble columns held up a glass ceiling that revealed the bruised twilight sky. Orchestral music drifted through the air, a classy veneer over the raw, seething ambition of the crowd below. This was the beating heart of New York Fashion Week, and Gideon Vance felt its rhythm in his blood. He made his entrance not with a bang, but with a calculated, seismic shockwave. On his arm was Crystal Monroe. She was everything Catherine was not, draped in a liquid silver gown that seemed poured onto her statuesque frame. Crystal was a supernova. Her hair was a cascade of platinum blonde. Her smile was a weapon, and her eyes scanned the room with the hungry appraisal of a predator who knows she's the most dangerous thing in the jungle. Every camera flash seemed to find them, the frantic clicks creating a wall of sound that was music to Gideon's ears. He saw the whispers start immediately. He saw Penelope Graves, the city's most feared fashion blogger, her fingers already flying across her phone's screen, her expression a mixture of shock and glee. He saw his colleagues from Aurelian Vanguard, their eyes widening, some with disapproval, others with a grudging respect for his sheer audacity. This was more than just bringing a date. This was a declaration of intent, a public execution of his marriage. "Darling, everyone is staring," Crystal purred, pressing herself closer to him. Her touch was electric, a jolt of validation. "Let them stare," Gideon murmured, his voice low and confident. He steered her towards the main champagne bar, his hand possessively on the small of her back. "Tonight we give them something to talk about for the rest of the year." He felt powerful, untouchable. He had outgrown Catherine, outgrown the quiet, respectable life she represented. That life was a starter home. He was ready for the palace. Crystal was the queen he had chosen to install. "Gideon!" What a surprise! The voice belonged to Howard Finch, the son of the outgoing chairman, a man whose position was built on nepotism rather than talent. Howard's eyes darted from Gideon to Crystal and back again, a sly, knowing smirk on his face. "And who is this vision?" Gideon's smile widened. This was the moment, the first brick in his new empire. "Howard, I'd like you to meet Crystal Monroe, my muse," he said, loading the word with significance. "Crystal, this is Howard Finch." "Charmed," Crystal said, extending a hand, her voice a husky whisper that promised secrets and sin. "The pleasure is all mine," Howard oozed, already captivated. "A muse, you say? I wasn't aware you were looking for new inspiration, Gideon. Where has Catherine been hiding tonight?" The question was a barb, and Gideon felt it, but he parried it with effortless arrogance. "Catherine is indisposed," he said, his tone suggesting a delicate, private matter, rather than a brutal discarding. "She understands that my work requires a certain public-facing dynamism. Crystal embodies the new direction I envision for Aurelian Vanguard." It was a bold, almost treasonous statement. He was already speaking as if he were in charge, redefining the company's image in his own. He was laying claim to the throne in front of the prince. They moved through the crowd, a vortex of glamour and gossip. Gideon introduced Crystal to designers, to editors from Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, to the money men who kept the gears of the fashion world turning. With each introduction, he solidified her position, and by extension, his own. He used phrases like the future face of the brand and a new era of inspiration. He was writing a new narrative for himself in real time, and Crystal was his co-author. She played her part with masterful precision. She was charming, witty, and deferential enough to the right people, while exuding an aura of untouchable stardom. She spoke of Gideon's genius, his unparalleled vision, and how he was unshackled now to truly achieve his destiny. They were a team, a power couple forged in ambition and presented to the world for its adoration. Gideon spotted Penelope Graves watching them from near a marble pillar, her expression unreadable. He decided to confront the narrative head-on. Leading Crystal over, he greeted the blogger with a disarming smile. "Penelope, always a pleasure. I see you've noticed the evening's main event." Penelope's eyes, sharp as a tailor's needles, took in the sight of them. "Gideon, you've certainly made a statement, a rather bold one. The press corps is having a field day. Gideon Vance debuts new muse as wife is a no-show. Is that the headline you were hoping for?" "The right headline writes itself when the story is compelling enough," Gideon retorted smoothly. "Aurelian Vanguard isn't about playing it safe. It's about vision, passion, and daring to embrace the future. That's what Crystal represents. That's what I represent." He was high on his own audacity. The champagne, the flashing lights, the intoxicating presence of Crystal on his arm. It all combined into a potent drug. He felt like a king surveying his court, completely unaware that the ground beneath his throne was about to crumble into a bottomless abyss. He was so focused on the spectacle of Crystal's arrival that he failed to notice the true arrivals of the evening. He didn't see the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the most powerful players, the board members, the old money investors, weren't looking at him and his glittering mistress. Their attention was being drawn elsewhere, towards the stage, where preparations were being made for an announcement that had nothing to do with the head of North American operations. It was an announcement that would redefine power in their world, and Gideon Vance, in his moment of supreme arrogance, was about to become a footnote in a story far grander and more terrible than he could ever imagine. The gala was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses, feigned laughter, and the relentless, unspoken jockeying for position. Gideon was at the center of his own storm, and he was reveling in the chaos. He held court near the towering ice sculpture of the Aurelian Vanguard logo, a triumphant smirk permanently affixed to his face. "The brand has become stagnant, you see," he explained to a trio of influential retailers, his voice pitched just loud enough to be overheard. "Bartholomew is a legend, but his time has passed. We need blood, we need fire. We need to appeal to a new generation that values authenticity and boldness." He gestured vaguely towards Crystal, who was laughing with a famous film director nearby. "We need a narrative that feels alive." The retailers, men in their late 60s who had seen ambitious young executives come and go, nodded politely, their expressions non-committal. They had heard this speech before, in various forms, from countless young Turks who thought they had reinvented the wheel. But Gideon's confidence was infectious, and the very public drama he had orchestrated lent his words a certain weight. He wasn't just talking about change, he was embodying it. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Gregory Thorne, the company's chief financial officer, a man whose personality was as grey as his suit. "Gideon, a word?" Gideon sighed internally but maintained his polished exterior. "Gregory, enjoying the party?" "It's an expensive party," Gregory said, his eyes humorless. "Listen, Gideon, what you're doing here, it's risky. The board values stability, tradition, publicly shaming your wife, a woman who's been nothing but graceful, while cozying up to, well, it's not a good look." Gideon let out a short, sharp laugh. "Gregory, my friend, you're a numbers man. You don't understand branding. Good looks are manufactured. I'm manufacturing a new one. Power isn't about stability anymore. It's about disruption. And Catherine represents stability. A quiet, comfortable, and utterly boring stability. That's not the future. She isn't the future." He said the final words with such dismissive finality that even Gregory, a man known for his stoicism, seemed taken aback. "Be that as it may," the CFO said, lowering his voice. "Old Mr. Finch is a great admirer of your wife. He speaks of her fondly. He might not appreciate this spectacle." "Bartholomew appreciates results," Gideon countered, his patience wearing thin. "And he knows I'm the only one with the guts to deliver them. He's about to name me his successor. A little spectacle will be forgiven when I double our stock price in the next 18 months. Gregory shook his head slowly, a grin set to his mouth. "Just be careful what you wish for, Gideon. The marble floors in this place are beautiful, but they're slippery." With that cryptic warning, the CFO melted back into the crowd. Gideon scoffed, dismissing the man as a relic. He scanned the room for Crystal and saw her in a deep conversation with a journalist from the New York Times. Perfect. She was planting the seeds, framing the narrative just as they had rehearsed. The story of the brilliant, stifled executive and his liberating new muse. The story of Gideon Vance, unleashed. He found himself drifting near a conversation between two of the board's oldest members, a pair of sisters, the formidable Henderson twins, who had inherited their father's seat and his skepticism. "Unprecedented," one was saying to the other. "To keep it quiet for so long, the discipline, the sheer audacity of it." "Father always said the Delacroix family were a different breed," the other replied, her voice a low conspiratorial hum. "They play the long game. They never show their hand until they're holding a royal flush." Gideon frowned, catching the name. Delacroix. He knew the name, of course. It was a legendary name in the world of European finance and textiles, a name synonymous with old-world power and unimaginable wealth. The family was notoriously reclusive, their empire managed through proxies and labyrinthine holding companies. Aurelian Vanguard itself was a subsidiary of one of those larger, more anonymous conglomerates. He had never given it much thought, other than knowing their ultimate benefactor was a shadowy, powerful entity. He assumed the Henderson twins were discussing some arcane business deal, some shift in the parent company's portfolio that had no bearing on his own imminent ascension. His world at that moment was blissfully small, revolving entirely around himself, his ambition, and the woman in the silver dress. He refilled his champagne flute, the bubbles fizzing against the crystal, mirroring the effervescent thrill in his veins. He was so close, the culmination of everything he had worked for, schemed for, and sacrificed for. He thought of Catherine again, a fleeting image of her in that drab navy dress. He imagined her at home, perhaps watching a dull documentary or reading a book, blissfully unaware that her world was being dismantled and auctioned off to the highest bidder. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. She had served her purpose. She had been the stable, respectable wife who helped him climb. But one does not take the ladder to the summit with them. One kicks it away so no one else can follow. The lights in the atrium began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd. On stage, a podium was illuminated by a single, brilliant spotlight. Gideon's heart began to hammer in his chest. This was it. He found Crystal's hand and pulled her close, their bodies aligned as they turned to face the stage. "Showtime," he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with triumph. She squeezed his hand, her painted nails digging slightly into his skin. "Our show, darling," she corrected him. "Don't ever forget that." Oh, he wouldn't. He looked out at the sea of faces, turned towards the stage, all of them witnesses to his victory. The whispers on the marble had all been about him. He was sure of it. He was the story. He was the moment. The universe, in its grand design, had conspired to bring him to this perfect, triumphant peak. He was utterly, blissfully, and catastrophically wrong. The man who walked into the spotlight was Bartholomew Finch. He was 80 years old, with a mane of white hair and a presence that commanded silence without him having to utter a word. He represented the old guard of fashion, a world of elegance, tradition, and quiet, unshakable power. His retirement was the end of an era, and the beginning, Gideon was certain, of his own. Bartholomew tapped the microphone, the soft sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Good evening, friends, colleagues, visionaries," he began, his voice a gravelly but warm baritone. "For 40 years, I have had the distinct honor of standing at the helm of Aurelian Vanguard. We have dressed movie stars and royalty. We have defined decades and weathered the storms of changing tastes. We have built more than a brand. We have built a legacy." The crowd applauded politely. Gideon stood a little straighter, a confident smile fixed on his face. He felt Crystal press against him, a silent signal of shared victory. "But legacy," Bartholomew continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "is not a monument to be admired. It is a living thing. It must be nurtured, it must be challenged, and at times it must be completely reimagined by a new and fearless leader." Gideon's heart hammered against his ribs. Fearless leader. He was describing him. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. They knew. Everyone knew. "Many of you are expecting me to announce my successor as CEO of Aurelian Vanguard tonight," Finch said, a sly twinkle in his eye. "And we will get to that. But first, there is a far more significant announcement to be made, one that concerns the very ownership and future direction of our parent company, the Delacroix Global Holdings. Gideon felt a flicker of confusion. Delacroix? Why was he talking about the holding company? It was a distant, faceless entity. He wanted to hear his name, to feel the applause wash over him. This was an unnecessary delay. As many of you know, the Delacroix family has always valued its privacy, Bartholomew explained. For the last 50 years, the empire has been managed by a board of trustees, awaiting the heir to come of age and decide to take their rightful place at the head of the table. That time has come. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unexpected. The reclusive Delacroix heir was taking control. This changed everything. The Henderson twins were now staring at the stage, their mouths slightly agape. They had known. Gideon's mind raced. What did this mean for him? Would a new, unknown owner honor Finch's choice for CEO? A knot of anxiety began to form in his stomach. This was not going according to his script. The heir is not some distant stranger, Finch's voice boomed, pulling Gideon from his spiraling thoughts. This individual has been among us for years, watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to claim what is theirs. A person who understands our world not from a spreadsheet, but from within. A person of immense strength, patience, and quiet resolve. Gideon scanned the faces of the most powerful people in the room. Was it one of them? Some European duke he'd never met? A banking scion working under a pseudonym? His confidence began to fray at the edges, the fine threads of his arrogance unraveling one by one. This transition of power has been in the works for over a year, Finch declared, his voice rising with theatrical gravity. And tonight, I have the profound and historic honor of ceding my position. Not just as CEO of Aurelian Vanguard, but as the interim chairman of the board for Delacroix Global Holdings. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The silence in the room was absolute, a perfect vacuum of anticipation and shock. It is my great privilege, Bartholomew Finch said, his voice ringing with a mixture of reverence and triumph, to introduce you to the new majority shareholder, the inheritor of the Delacroix fortune, and the new chairwoman of the entire global enterprise. Gideon held his breath. His entire future hung on the next few words. Finch smiled, a wide, genuine, and almost paternal smile as he looked out into the crowd, his eyes seeming to find a specific spot in the shadows. Please welcome Mrs. Catherine Delacroix Vance. The name struck Gideon with the physical force of a lightning bolt. Catherine Delacroix Vance. For a frozen second, the words did not compute. They were a random assemblage of sounds, a glitch in the audio system, a cruel joke. He turned his head slightly, a disbelieving frown creasing his brow, expecting to see some other, older, more formidable Catherine step out from the wings. But there was no one else. The name echoed in the profound silence of the atrium. Catherine Delacroix Vance, his Catherine, his quiet, mousy, wallpaper wife. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was... And then he saw her. She emerged not from the wings of the stage, but from a private corridor at the side of the hall, a path reserved for honored guests and royalty. The transformation was so absolute, so breathtaking, that it defied belief. Gone was the simple navy dress, the sensible shoes, the apologetic posture. The woman who walked into the soft glow of a follow spotlight was a queen. She wore a bespoke gown of emerald green silk that shimmered like a living thing, its cut severe and elegant. Diamonds, real and spectacular, glittered at her throat and ears. the legendary Delacroix emeralds, rumored to have been lost for a generation. Her hair, once pinned in a modest bun, was styled in a sleek, powerful chignon that highlighted the aristocratic lines of her face. But it was her expression that shattered Gideon's world. The gentle, accommodating softness was gone, replaced by a cool, unshakable composure. Her eyes, which had for years only reflected his own image back at him, now held a deep, ancient power. She walked with a grace and purpose he had never seen, her every step silent and deliberate on the marble floor. The sound in the room returned all at once, a tidal wave of gasps, frantic whispers, and the explosion of 100 camera flashes. Penelope Graves looked as though she had seen a ghost, her phone nearly slipping from her trembling fingers. Gregory Thorne, the CFO, simply nodded to himself, as if he had finally seen the punchline to a very long, very complicated joke. Howard Finch's jaw was on the floor. Gideon couldn't breathe. His lungs had seized, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He felt Crystal's hand go limp in his, then slip away entirely. He looked at her. The color had drained from her face, her vixen's smile replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Her eyes darted between Gideon and the regal figure approaching the stage, the frantic calculations visible on her face. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Catherine reached the stage and ascended the small set of stairs, Bartholomew Finch extending a hand to her, which she took with a small, gracious nod. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect, before retreating to the side of the stage. Catherine stepped up to the podium. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed home. She adjusted the microphone, the small movement commanding more authority than any of Gideon's blustering speeches. Her eyes scanned the stunned audience, a sea of famous, powerful, and influential faces, all of them now utterly captivated by her. And then her gaze found Gideon. Across the vast, crowded room, their eyes locked. There was no hatred in her expression, no anger, no tears. There was something far worse, a calm, piercing, and utterly detached assessment. It was the look a scientist might give a specimen under a microscope, just before dissecting it. In that single, silent glance, she stripped him of everything. His arrogance, his ambition, his self-delusion. He was no longer the powerful executive, the master of his own destiny. He was just a man, small and insignificant, who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The whispers around him grew louder, a chorus of his own ruin. "Vance? Her name is Vance? She's married to him." My God, he brought his mistress. Did you see his face? He had no idea. The ultimate power move. She let him hang himself with his own rope. Crystal took a small, then a larger step away from him, then another. She was creating distance, disentangling herself from the wreckage. Gideon was radioactive, and she was fleeing the fallout zone. He stood frozen, a statue of hubris in a Tom Ford suit, as his wife, the woman he had dismissed as a footnote in his life, prepared to read his eulogy to the entire world. The thunder of her name was still ringing in his ears, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the storm had only just begun. Catherine's voice, when she finally spoke, was not loud, but it filled the cavernous hall with an astonishing clarity. It was the same soft voice she had used to ask him if he wanted coffee, but now it was imbued with a steely resonance that commanded absolute attention. "Thank you, Bartholomew," she began, her gaze leaving Gideon to address the crowd, "for your stewardship, for your friendship, and for keeping my family's legacy safe until I was ready to claim it." She then turned her attention to the assembled guests. "Many of you are surprised to see me here. For 12 years I have been content to live a quiet life. I believe that to truly understand an empire, one must first understand its people, not from a boardroom, but from the ground up. I have watched this company. I have studied its strengths and identified its weaknesses. And I have learned a great deal about character, about loyalty, and about betrayal. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Gideon felt each one pierce his skin. He was suffocating, drowning in the shocked and scornful stares of the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. He saw Crystal slipping through the crowd, her silver dress a streak of light as she fled towards the exit, a rat deserting a sinking ship. She didn't even give him a backward glance. Aurelian Vanguard, and indeed all of Delacroix Global Holdings, is entering a new era, Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength. An era of integrity, innovation, and strength. We will be cutting away the parts of this organization that have grown decadent, dishonest, or disloyal. We will reward talent and vision, but we will no longer tolerate arrogance and duplicity. Our future will be built on a foundation of respect. Effective immediately, the board has approved my proposed restructuring plan. A new wave of murmurs swept the room. She already had a plan. She had a board's approval. This wasn't a recent development. This had been in motion for months, perhaps years. While he was plotting his tawdry little affair and his petty promotion, she had been moving armies and redrawing maps. Her speech was brief, powerful, and visionary. She outlined a future for the company that was both exciting and ruthless. She finished by thanking everyone for their attendance and promised a new dawn for the company. The atrium erupted in thunderous applause. It was genuine, fervent applause for the unexpected queen who had just claimed her throne. As the applause subsided and the lights came up, a swarm of journalists and well-wishers surged towards the stage, all desperate for a word with the new empress of fashion. But Catherine held up a hand, and two large, impeccably dressed men from her security detail materialized, creating a clear path for her as she descended the stairs. She ignored the clamoring reporters, her eyes fixed on one target, Gideon. She walked towards him, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. The whispers died in her wake. The air crackled with tension. Gideon was rooted to the spot, a prisoner awaiting his sentence. She stopped a few feet from him. Up close, her transformation was even more profound. The power coming off her was a palpable force. "Hello, Gideon," she said, her voice now a low, private murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "Catherine, I don't understand," he stammered, his mind a vortex of confusion and terror. "Delacroix, your family." "My mother was the last direct heir," she explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. "When she and my father passed away, the estate was placed in trust until I turned 35, or until I felt I was ready to lead. I chose to wait. I wanted to live a normal life. I wanted to see if I could be loved for who I was, not for what I had. I wanted to see what kind of man I had married when he thought no one of consequence was watching." She paused, her eyes holding his. "And you showed me." The cold, simple truth of it crashed down on him. Their entire life together, his entire career, had been a test. A long, elaborate, 12-year character evaluation. And he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. "The promotion you were so sure about," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The position of head of North American operations. I dissolved it this afternoon. It's a redundant position. A vanity title." He flinched as if she had struck him. "Your shares in the company, which were granted as part of your executive compensation package, are subject to a morality clause. A clause that I personally drafted with our legal team 6 months ago. publicly flaunting an affair while representing the company is, I believe, a flagrant violation. They will be forfeit. Of course, you are welcome to challenge it in court." A tiny ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My lawyers are the best in the world." He could say nothing. His throat was raw, his tongue a leaden weight in his mouth. "As for your employment," she said, delivering the final, fatal blow, "your services are no longer required at Aurelian Vanguard or any of its subsidiaries. Your access has been revoked. The contents of your office will be couriered to you, to your new address, wherever that may be." She motioned discreetly with her head. 2 more security men moved to flank Gideon. "These gentlemen will escort you from the premises," Catherine said, her tone final. "Your presence is no longer welcome." She turned to walk away, her back straight, her emerald gown flowing behind her. "Catherine, wait!" The desperate cry was torn from Gideon's throat. She stopped but didn't turn around. "After all we've been through, after everything, don't I deserve something?" he pleaded, his voice cracking, his entire world reduced to this one pathetic appeal. She paused for a long moment. Then she turned her head slightly, looking at him over her shoulder. Her expression was not one of pity, but of a strange, remote sadness, the kind one feels for a creature that has proven to be a profound disappointment. "You already had something, Gideon," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 wasted years. "You had everything, and you threw it all away for a cheap imitation." With that, she walked on, disappearing into the crowd of her new subjects, leaving Gideon Vance standing alone in the ruins of his life, with only his public humiliation and 2 security guards for company. The reckoning was complete. The weeks that followed the Vanguard Gala were a brutal education for Gideon Vance. The story was everywhere, an irresistible cocktail of wealth, betrayal, and revenge. Penelope Graves's blog post, titled "The Queen in the Navy Dress," went viral, cementing the narrative of the underestimated wife and the fool of a husband. Gideon became a pariah overnight. His name was a punchline in boardrooms and a cautionary tale at cocktail parties. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. His calls to headhunters went unreturned. He was professionally and socially bankrupt. Stripped of his company credit cards and access to their joint accounts, he was forced to move into a soulless corporate apartment, a stark contrast to the penthouse he had once called home. The boxes from his office arrived, filled with useless awards and photos of a life that no longer existed. He tried to call Crystal once, but her number was disconnected. A week later, he saw a paparazzi photo of her on the arm of a grizzled film producer in his 70s. She was a survivor, and he had been just a stepping stone on her path. Meanwhile, Catherine Delacroix-Vance was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Vogue simultaneously. The world was fascinated by her story, but even more so by her actions. She was not a figurehead. She was a force. Her first act as chairwoman was to clean house. She systematically removed the executives who had thrived on sycophancy and backstabbing, promoting instead the quiet, brilliant designers and strategists Gideon had overlooked or actively suppressed. She axed his vanity projects, redirecting the funds into sustainable materials research and an apprenticeship program for underprivileged youth. She moved with a speed and precision that left the industry breathless. Her public persona was one of quiet authority and formidable intelligence. In interviews, she spoke not of her personal life, but of her vision for a more ethical and innovative future for fashion. When one bold journalist dared to ask about her ex-husband, her response was chilling in its finality. "My past is a private matter," she said, her expression unreadable. "My focus is on the future, and Mr. Vance is not in it." The The message was clear. He had been erased. Catherine moved into the Delacroix ancestral home on the Upper East Side, a grand limestone mansion that had been kept dormant for decades. Her loyal assistant, Bernard, who had served her family for years while posing as a simple household manager, was now her official chief of staff. Together, they worked tirelessly, reshaping the global conglomerate in her image. One crisp autumn evening, months after the gala, Catherine stood in her new office on the top floor of the Aurelian Vanguard building. It was the same office Bartholomew Finch had occupied, but she had redecorated it completely. The dark mahogany and leather had been replaced with clean lines, modern art, and a vast glass wall that overlooked the glittering expanse of Manhattan. She held a glass of wine, not champagne, and looked down at the city lights. They were the same lights she had looked at from the penthouse she had shared with Gideon, but now the view was different. Before, she had been a spectator. Now, she was a master of this universe. There were moments, late at night, when a shadow of the past would touch her. A phantom ache for the man she thought she had married, the dream of a simple life she had once cherished. But the feeling was fleeting, like a cloud passing in front of the sun. The betrayal had been a brutal, painful fire, but it had burned away the illusions, leaving behind something harder, stronger, and far more real. It had forged her into the leader she was born to be. Bernard entered the office quietly, holding a tablet. "Madam Chairwoman, the quarterly projections are in. We are up 17% across all sectors." Catherine smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Bernard. A good start." "Indeed," he replied. "And a final piece of news. The law firm representing Mr. Vance contacted our legal team today. He is dropping his challenge to the forfeiture of his shares. They say he can no longer afford the legal fees." Catherine simply nodded, taking a slow sip of her wine. There was no triumph in her, no gloating. It was just a loose end being tied, a final chapter closing. Gideon Vance was no longer a villain or a ghost in her life. He was simply irrelevant, a faded photograph from a past she had long since transcended. She was Catherine Delacroix now, first and foremost. She had shed the name Vance, along with the woman who had worn it. She looked out at the endless city, at the dawn of her own empire, and felt not the weight of her legacy, but the lightness of her own limitless future. She was finally, completely, and gloriously free. 6 months had passed since the night the world turned on its axis. The vibrant chaos of autumn had given way to the stark, quiet beauty of a New York winter. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes outside the tall arched windows of Catherine Delacroix's private study, blanketing the city in a pristine layer of white. The mansion was quiet, a sanctuary of calm against the ceaseless hum of the empire she now commanded. The name Vance felt like something from another lifetime, a poorly fitting coat she had long since discarded. She was reviewing a proposal for a new sustainable textile factory in Scandinavia, her mind sharp and focused, when Bernard entered the room, his expression unusually troubled. "Madam Chairwoman," he began, his voice a low murmur. "You have a visitor. I told him you were unavailable, but he refuses to leave. He said he will wait in the snow all night if he has to." Catherine didn't look up from her papers. "I'm not expecting anyone." "Who is it?" Bernard hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It's Gideon Vance." Catherine's hand stilled. A flicker of something, not surprise, not anger, but a weary, distant memory, passed through her. She had expected this, in a way. Not today, not necessarily ever, but she knew his pride was a stubborn beast, and it would likely need one final definitive death before it released him. She had lawyers and security to handle this. A simple phone call and he would be gone, a non-entity once more. She looked out the window at the swirling snow, at the man she could just make out standing by the ornate front gates, a lone, dark figure without an umbrella, his shoulders dusted with white. He looked small against the grandeur of her home, against the vastness of the city. "Very well, Bernard," she said, her voice calm and even. "Show him into the west parlour. Give him a towel and some tea. I will be down in 5 minutes." Bernard's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he simply nodded. "As you wish, madam." As he left, Catherine stood and walked to the window, observing the pathetic figure for a moment longer. This wasn't a test for him. It was a test for her. Could she face the ghost of her past without flinching? Could she confront the man who had shattered her heart without letting a single crack show in the formidable woman she had become? She felt a profound, settling calm. Yes, she could. When she entered the west parlour, he was standing by the unlit fireplace, awkwardly holding a cup of tea. The change in him was shocking. The impeccably tailored suits were gone, replaced by a simple wool coat that hung loosely on his frame, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. He was thinner, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, haunted look. The sharp, predatory angles of his face had softened into a mask of weariness and defeat. He was no longer the king he had imagined himself to be. He was just a man who had lost his way. "Gideon," she said. Her voice didn't betray a single emotion. He flinched at the sound and turned to face her. "Catherine." Her name was a raw, broken thing on his tongue. "Thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" she asked, choosing to stand rather than sit, maintaining a sense of formal distance. "If this is about money, you should speak to my lawyers. If it's about anything else, I can't imagine we have anything left to discuss." "It's not about money," he said quickly, shaking his head. He placed the untouched tea on the mantelpiece, his hand trembling slightly. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I need to understand." "Understand what?" "The test," he said, his voice cracking. "Gregory Thorne told me. He said you were always watching. That our whole marriage was some kind of evaluation. Was any of it real? Or was I just some lab rat in your 12-year experiment?" Catherine looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the wreckage he had become. She felt not pity, but a profound, aching sadness for the waste of it all. "It was all real, Gideon," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "That was the tragedy of it. I didn't marry you as an experiment. I fell in love with a charming, ambitious, brilliant man whom I believed had a good heart. I loved him. I built a life for him. I was happy." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "The test, as you call it, didn't begin with a plan. It began with a disappointment, then another, and another. It began when I saw your ambition start to curdle into arrogance, when your desire for success became a willingness to step on anyone to achieve it, when the man I married started to disappear, replaced by a stranger who wore his face and cared only for himself." Tears welled in Gideon's eyes. "So you just watched? You let me become that person? You never said anything." "What would I have said?" she countered, a touch of steel returning to her voice. "That your ambition was making you cruel. That the compliments you gave me were laced with condescension. That I knew you were lying about your late nights for a year before you even met Crystal. You wouldn't have listened. The Gideon I was married to by then had no respect for my opinion. My words would have been like the wind. So, yes, I watched, and I waited. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped the man I loved would come back. But he never did. He finally broke, a ragged sob escaping his throat. I lost everything? No, Catherine said, her voice firm but not unkind. You didn't lose it. You traded it. You traded my love for public adoration. You traded our life for a promotion you thought you deserved. You traded a genuine partnership for a cheap imitation with a woman who valued your position, not your person. Those were your choices, Gideon. Not my test. He finally looked up, his face a ruin of regret. What do I do now? It was the question of a lost child, and it was the one thing she could not answer for him. She walked towards the door, her part in this final, painful conversation over. You start again, she said, her hand on the doorknob. And this time, you build a life based on something real, on character, on kindness. Build a man that you yourself can respect. Perhaps then, others will too. She opened the door and turned back to him one last time. Bernard will show you out. Goodbye, Gideon. She left him standing there, a ghost in a room full of memories, and walked back to her study without looking back. She did not feel triumph or the satisfaction of revenge. She felt only a quiet, somber sense of closure. The last echo of her old life had finally faded. Catherine sat at her desk and picked up the proposal for the Scandinavian factory. She looked at the plans, at the future she was building, a future of her own design. A small silver frame sat on the corner of her desk, a photo she rarely looked at. It was of her parents, standing on a hillside in France, smiling. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the image of her mother, a woman of immense strength who had also known heartache. She had honored their legacy. She had survived her fire, and now the entire world was waiting for her to reshape it. And she was more than ready. And that's how a quiet, overlooked wife turned the tables on her arrogant husband in the most public way imaginable. It's a story that reminds us that true power isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's silent, patient, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Catherine didn't just reclaim her life, she claimed the empire that was rightfully hers, proving that the greatest strength often comes from being consistently underestimated. What would you have done in her position? Would you have sought such a public revenge, or handled it behind closed doors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of shocking twists and ultimate justice, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves a good revenge story. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more tales of drama and intrigue coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening.